Tonight, as UK borrowing costs rise, the Treasury tries to reassure the market, saying the government won't break its fiscal rules. So could that mean cuts to public services? As for the Chancellor, she's heading to China tonight to try and drum up investment for the UK. The Conservatives and the Lib Dems both say she should cancel her trip. Meanwhile, Number 10 say Keir Starmer will keep on accusing Liz Truss of crashing the economy after she sends him a legal letter ordering him to cease and desist. Also tonight, the Greater Manchester Mayor, Andy Burnham, splits with the government and says there should be a public inquiry into grooming gangs. And stepping away from the picket line, Mick Lynch, head of the RMT union, announces his retirement. All that and more with Salma, Shah and Tom Baldwin, who'll be with us for the next hour. It's Thursday, I'm Sophy Ridge, live from Westminster, and this is The Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Lots to talk about tonight, but we start with the situation in Los Angeles and the devastation caused by the wildfires, because the authorities said today they're hopeful of bringing the fires under control as the winds start to get weaker. But 20 people have been arrested for looting, and there's also been criticism for those residents who ignored evacuation orders. Well, 5 major fires are still raging across Los Angeles, with a 6th fire still burning, but now under control. Authorities say the largest of the fires is still in Los Angeles at Pacific Palisades. That's reached more than 17,000 acres in size. Our US correspondent David Blevins reports.
LA residents are waking up to news they didn't want to hear. More fires were sparked overnight. And from Hollywood's Walk of Fame, they watched. Flames spreading over the hills towards the city's most iconic landmarks. The worst fires in Palisades and Eaton, still raging out of control.
Today, we expect winds to subside somewhat, which will allow fire crews to increase containment lines. However, and I want to be very clear here as well, we are still under red flag warning with extreme fire behavior possibilities.
There's no respite for the residents of Altadena, a northern suburb of the city. Fire department resources are stretched to the limit here, and residents' attempts to save their property appear futile.
It would be difficult to find the right words to describe the sense of desperation that there is right now, but I don't really need the words because the pictures speak for themselves. You're watching in real time the challenges that the Los Angeles Fire Department is facing on many fronts.
There were desperate efforts being made to retrieve belongings, those who had waited in hope now conceding to the evacuation order.
Well, we have just driven into the evacuation zone here, right on the edge of the Eaton fire, and the scenes are truly apocalyptic. On every street corner there are bright orange flames, and this is a tragic reality for the people who lived on these streets, who drove these cars, who owned businesses here.
The charred remains of electricity poles, power cables dangling precariously. Firefighters already exhausted face real danger. There's a political battle raging too. Questions about how such an iconic city could apparently be so unprepared. The president-elect blaming local Democrats.
This is a true tragedy, and it's a mistake of the governor, and you could say the administration. They don't have any water. They didn't have water in the fire hydrants. They don't have water. So what's happened is a tragedy, and the governor has not done a good job.
There's also anger at the LA mayor. We caught up with her returning from a trip to Ghana, to her city on fire. Fire chiefs say that they're really stretched to the limit and running out of water. What have you got to say to that? Have you no response to that? Do you owe citizens an apology for being absent while their homes were burning? Do you regret cutting the fire department budget by millions of dollars, Madam Mayor? Have you nothing to say today? Over 7,500 emergency personnel have been deployed, but this is an unpredictable race against time and nature. David Blevins, Sky News, in Los Angeles.
Now, any more updates on the fire will, of course, bring you. But on tonight's show, we're talking about the economy here in the UK, because today sterling fell to its lowest level against the dollar since November 2023, and UK borrowing costs hit levels not seen since 1998 earlier this week. And, this is really bad news because it means the Treasury has less money to play with. Running the economy is actually nothing like running a household budget. It's not as simple as saying, right, we've got X amount coming in through tax, which means we can spend X amount on public services. Because the totals in the in and out columns, they keep changing because of things you can never fully control. Growth, the cost of borrowing, the value of the pound, government bond markets. Small changes to any of these can leave you with an awful lot more money to play with or an awful lot less. And that is what Rachel Reeves has found. It's particularly difficult because she hasn't left herself much headroom. There's a razor-thin margin against the main fiscal rule. And she came into office promising to be the Iron Chancellor, sticking to her fiscal rules come what may. It sounds strong and reassuring, but it's also inflexible. She's facing a worsening economic picture, but says she's sticking to the plan. It's a bit like, keeping driving down the same road even when half the tarmac's been ripped up. Things are going to get pretty bumpy. So what does that look like? Well, the Independent Office for Budget Responsibility is preparing a new economic forecast in March, which the Chancellor will respond to and then potentially make some adjustments to. If she wants to stick to the rules, well, she needs more tax rises or spending cuts. If you thought November's budget was painful, it may be that you ain't seen nothing yet. We'll be, of course, getting the latest on this from our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Cates.
Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves in the comfort of opposition. The narrative back then was easy.
The Tories have crashed the economy.
They crashed the economy. They've crashed the pound.
Whether she was named or not, the target was obvious.
Liz Truss crashed the economy.
Today, a surprise counterattack. The ex-Prime Minister turning the tables.
Rachel Reeves has pushed this country to the brink of economic crisis.
Lawyers for the former Prime Minister have written to Keir Starmer complaining about his claims that she crashed the economy. Of those claims, the letter says, their publication is not only extremely damaging, but also grossly defamatory and indefensible. Repetition by you of the defamatory statement has caused serious harm to our client's reputation, and calls on the current Prime Minister to immediately cease and desist. There is a significantly greater challenge to the government's economic narrative unfolding. Rising borrowing costs, the pound falling to its lowest level in a year, and whether Rachel Reeves will have to squeeze public services more as a result. Now, it's the Tories on the front foot.
In the last 48 hours, borrowing costs have reached a 27-year high. And it is the Chancellor's decisions that have led us here. Before the election, the Right Honourable Lady promised that Labour would get debt falling. Does this mean that the public should expect cuts to public service spending if the OBR judge her fiscal headroom has evaporated?
An unusual evening statement from the Treasury on Tuesday did suggest a spending squeeze could be coming. The minister adamant that wasn't a panicked move to calm markets.
And might I just say that there was no emergency statement or emergency intervention. These are make-believe words being propagated by members on the benches opposite. The Treasury responded to requests from journalists about headroom as we might do in the normal way. There is no need for any emergency intervention, and there hasn't been one.
A big problem for the government, but mostly caused by international factors. The global money markets pushing up the cost of government borrowing. Just one example of how the UK is being buffeted by international factors. It's the story of 2025. Trump and tariffs, China and trade, wars in Europe and the Middle East pushing up energy costs. Can the UK's politicians really say they are in charge of the nation's destiny?
That was the mission of Foreign Secretary David Lammy today, outlining the government's foreign policy plan for an unstable world and an unstable president.
I call our new approach progressive realism, taking the world as it is, not as we would wish it to be, advancing progressive ends by realist means. Through a storm of crises, we've been putting this into practice. With the United States, our closest ally, progressive realism means strengthening our friendship with both sides of the aisle.
Rebuilding ties with China is part of the plan too. The Prime Minister met President Xi before Christmas. The Chancellor flies to Beijing tonight on the hunt for investment. The government needs results fast. Sam Coates, Sky News, Westminster.
Well, Sam joins us now here in the studio. Sam, you've been talking about this all week, but it feels like things coming to a head today.
With that appearance in the Commons by a Treasury Minister, yes, we have been talking about it for 48 hours. If I'm being brutally honest, Sophie, the story hasn't moved on in the last 48 hours. That much borrowing went up, the cost went up, the pound went down. And I think it's important just for viewers to calibrate it. I think this is a big problem for government. It's absolutely not a crisis at the moment. But in your excellent introduction to this, you referred to the fact that there are factors here that are beyond Rachel Reeves' control. And it's a big problem for government. And there's one that I want to just highlight for a moment, and that's the arrival of Donald Trump in the White House. Now, as you said, Rachel Reeves gave herself very little wiggle room, put herself at risk. But imagine this. Imagine Donald Trump comes into office and he cuts taxes and he increases spending quite a lot. All of that quite inflationary. All of that is going to have the impact before March, before the OBR judge Rachel Reeves against her headroom, of pushing up the cost of government debt. So we don't know the path of government debt between now and this big forecast that could mean a lot of cuts in spending, further cuts, squeezes in spending in March. We just don't know what Trump's going to do. But that is the kind of thing that Rachel Reeves, by taking her approach, has exposed Britain to. I wonder whether the consequence of all of this, Sophie, is that just there is a feeling in Number 10 that they are not keeping a close enough eye on Rachel Reeves and what the Treasury is up to. I think they are surprised, they feel a bit surprised and a bit taken aback by the consequences of economic policy. They trusted her, but it hasn't all gone how they thought, and I think that is an issue.
OK, so do you see it almost as like Number 10 trying to kind of pin this on Rachel Reeves? Is that?
I don't think they're blaming, but I think there is, to some degree, quite a lot of people who are a bit aghast around the cabinet table. If she has to squeeze spending further than she thought, even back in October, that's a big set of cabinet fights. Until now, Keir Starmer has backed Rachel Reeves every step of the way. If even more difficult decisions have to be taken, is he going to continue to do that?
Interesting stuff. Sam, thank you very much indeed. Sam Coates there, our Deputy Political Editor. Well, tomorrow's papers are sure to cover the state of the economy and potentially that trip to China as well. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the editor of the Courier in Dundee, David Clegg, and also the Mail on Sunday's Deputy Political Editor, Anna Nikolova. Right, let's bring in now, shall we, the former Business Secretary, Sir Vince Cable. Great to have you on the programme this evening. Just want to talk to you about the economy, because we've obviously seen the fall in value of the pound, we've seen the rise in the cost of government borrowing. Is this standard market turbulence, or is there something more concerning going on?
Well, it is worrying, but it's not a crisis. I mean, a lot of the increase in the long-term interest rates, which are the main source of worry, is internationally driven. It's driven by essentially what's happening in the United States. But, you know, Britain has to be careful. I mean, we are dependent, you know, the phrase, on the kindness of strangers. You know, we're a borrowing country, so we're very much affected by rising real interest rates.
Do you think it's a verdict on Rachel Reeves and the current government then, or do you seem to be saying it's more about international impact?
I think it's primarily an international phenomenon. I mean, the budget didn't go down well, but I think not so much because of what they did, but I mean, the problem goes back to opposition. I think the Labour Party ring-fenced about three-quarters of government revenue, so it couldn't increase taxes on the things that probably should have been taxed, and so you were left with economically damaging measures like increasing national insurance, which didn't go down well. But I think we should be avoiding panic. I mean, there's people saying Rachel Reeves shouldn't go to China because there's a crisis, so it's nothing remotely on that level.
Well, the Lib Dems are saying that. That's what Sarah Davies said.
Well, I disagree with them on that particular point. Yeah. But this is not an economic crisis. She's much better concentrating on doing what she's proposing to do, which is to maintain good economic relationships with both superpowers, even if we don't like their governments.
Do you think the Lib Dems are, you know, I guess, playing political games at the minute then, saying that she shouldn't be going to China?
No, I'm not a spokesman for the party. I'm just giving an independent view on it. I mean, if you know, we're interested in the British economy and the future of the world economy, we have to engage with the Chinese. Yeah,
it's interesting you say that. Then you think I'm keen to talk about, you know, the kind of the bigger economic picture as well. But you know, she is going to China, like you say. You think it is right to be engaging with China?
Well, I would, yeah. I mean, not that we necessarily like the government. We have some profound differences and disagreements, but, you know, they are one of the two superpowers, which drives the world economy. We share the same planet. You know, we have a common interest in dealing with climate change issues, and actually the Chinese will be more proactive on it than the new Trump administration. And then we have our own interests as a country, you know, which are potentially very substantial in China. British companies, you know, whether it's Jaguar Land Rover, AstraZeneca, you know, major investments in China, and you know, the income streams they get from it fuel investment in the UK.
Some see as apologist is a bit too strong, but certainly on the softer end of the China spectrum. Is that fair to say?
Well, I'm certainly not an apologist. I'm very critical of a lot of things that happen there, political and economic. But, you know, and I'm a realist. I mean, a lot of the countries we have to deal with in the world don't have human rights records that we approve of. I mean, Saudi would be another very good example. We have to deal with them. The Chinese are the same. And we have common areas of interest, and we shouldn't get away from that. I mean, having a business-like relationship means having a combination of threats and opportunities. And there are threats where the Chinese are concerned. Cybersecurity is an obvious area. But there are important opportunities too.
You were talking about the difficult picture that Rachel Reeves has because of international affairs, and many people say that as a result she's going to have to cut spending or squeeze spending if she wants to stick to those fiscal rules. I mean, you of course were part of the coalition government that imposed austerity. I know it's something that was, you know, many Lib Dems see as a mistake. But what would your message be to Rachel Reeves on spending cuts?
No, I don't think the strategy we pursued was a mistake at all. I mean, we inherited, as a result of the banking crisis, massive deficit in the budget. It had to be dealt with. It was going to be painful. You know, Alistair Darling had a plan. Ours was to reduce the deficit a bit more quickly, but it had to be done.
But the spending cuts now, do you think that would be the right way forward for Rachel Reeves?
No, there has to be a balance of tax and spending. I mean, I hope we don't get into that position. And from what I can see at the moment, it doesn't seem to be necessary. But, you know, if the OBR comes up with a very, very negative outlook and makes it absolutely clear that there need to be more fiscal measures, it needs to be a combination of tax and spending. You can't entirely rely on public spending, which has been hammered pretty hard over the years, and I was part of that. I acknowledge it.
Another part of the puzzle is growth, sluggish growth, and I guess some people would say that the elephant in the room here is Brexit. Do you think that's right?
It's part of it. I mean, we've had 4 big shocks in the last decade and a half. We had the financial crisis, we've had Brexit, we've had COVID, we've had the Ukraine war, and they've all taken their toll on the British economy. I mean, what Brexit did was to have a very serious impact on business confidence and willingness to invest, and that has, you know, added to all the problems which the financial crisis had caused. But we're stuck with it. I mean, there is a genuine problem. We can't just walk back into the European Union. I would like us to reset the relationships a bit more actively than the Prime Minister's doing, but it's not an easy call.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, obviously, that, you know, you can't kind of rerun the referendum, kind of jump back into the European Union. But there are some, I guess, on the left and some Lib Dems as well, who think that actually, you know, we could look at things like rejoining the single market, like rejoining the customs union. We'd have a very particular form of Brexit. Do you have sympathy with that?
I think we should be proactive. I think the mobility scheme was an open goal. We should have gone for it. The Prime Minister, I think, was nervous about upsetting some of the Brexit voters. I think that was a mistake. So there are small steps that we could be doing.
But you're not talking about, you don't think we should be like rejoining the single market then?
I wouldn't have any problems with it, but I can see that is a really big step. The customs union is probably easier in practical terms, but I think we should be thinking, certainly in the medium term, of getting much closer links to the European Union. In any event, you know, defence priorities are going to force us to collaborate much more with the European Union. The Ukraine war is still there, and that's the immediate route for closer collaboration.
And then just finally, it's tough for the Lib Dems, isn't it? I mean, in some ways it's not tough because you've got all these MPs, which is, you know, had a great performance at the election, but in a very kind of heated parliament, sometimes, I guess, getting the kind of political oxygen is tough, like cutting through. What would your advice be to the Lib Dems now?
Well, I was a leader at a difficult time, and it is difficult to get oxygen, as you quite rightly say. I think one thing is working to the Lib Dems' advantage is the fact that the Tory party seems to be much more concerned with positioning itself to be close to the Reform Party than worrying about our tack, which of course a lot of moderate Tories are much more comfortable with us than their former party. So, you know, in that strategic sense, I think our party feels it's making good progress. And we'll see in the local government elections, I think the Lib Dems will make a lot of gains.
OK, thank you very much. Great to talk to you on the programme today. Vince Cable there. Well, earlier I spoke to Rupert Harrison, the former Treasury advisor and senior advisor to Macro Advisory Partners. Thank you very much for being on the programme. You're obviously a Conservative, but I feel like you're someone who's perhaps as kind of doggedly party political as some of your colleagues. So I'm very interested to get your assessment on what we've seen this week with regards to the cost of government borrowing, the value of the pound. Like, how worried do you think we should be?
Well, look, I think it is concerning, and it's not just the last week. This is actually the culmination of the last month or so, where the UK has got caught up in a global storm. And what has happened is that markets are looking at the US economy in particular, but also all around the world. They're more worried than they were a few months ago that inflation is maybe not beaten, maybe inflation's coming back, maybe Donald Trump with tax cuts and tariffs is going to reignite it again. And so we've seen the interest rates on government debt all around the world going up. And the problem the UK has is that it's a bit like a beauty contest. At the moment, the UK is looking like the ugliest contestant in the beauty contest because we've got low growth, quite persistent inflation, and in particular, very high government borrowing after the budget. And that is making markets say, well, hang on, you're going to be issuing a lot of debt, borrowing in the markets, and we're not willing to buy that debt. And what that does is it pushes up the interest rates. And just in the last few days, we've also seen the pound falling at the same time, and that's not a great sign.
So it's a combination of international factors over which the government's got no control and then some specific factors about the UK.
The UK has made itself quite vulnerable to this global storm because we're borrowing so much money and because growth in the economy at the same time is so anemic.
Now, if Rachel Reeves is going to stick to her fiscal rules, which she says she will, she needs to now look at spending cuts or tax rises. I mean, what do you think she should do?
Well, what I think she should do is get on top of this problem, because I think this is the new environment we're in. Basically, we have an economic strategy that has been born in the last decade where a lot of economists in the Labour Party and around the Labour Party said we should be borrowing a lot more, and that was in a decade where interest rates were effectively zero. The problem is interest rates are now not zero, they're 5% and rising, and that strategy doesn't make so much sense. And that is going to be the environment we're in now for the time being. And so I would get on top of it now. I think she should bring forward things that she could do to show she's getting on top of spending. They are committed, for example, to cutting the welfare bill with some of the measures the previous government passed on to them. Get on and do that. Demonstrate that you can cut spending.
So you're talking about spending cuts, basically. That's what you think?
Well, I think that would be more credible. What I think we probably will get is in March, the Office of Budget Responsibility has to do new forecasts, which will show, I think, that the headroom, the very small amount of headroom that the Chancellor gave herself in the budget has probably been eroded. She's probably going to look like she's missing her fiscal rules. And the easy political option is to say, in 4 or 5 years' time, we're going to just slightly reduce the amount we're planning to spend. So she might have to trim the envelope for her spending review. But if it's in 4 or 5 years' time, that defers the difficult decisions. Markets will probably accept that up to a point, but it's not really getting on top of the problem.
I mean, some people listening to you might be like, look, you're the guy who was George Osbourne's right-hand man throughout austerity. So you are kind of Mr. Spending Cut in a way. And yet, for many people, those spending cuts and any spending cuts now are really, really painful. And they also feel that it stores up future problems in the economy by taking away investment.
Well, so look, there's another choice, which is raise taxes. So that's the choice of the government, is the balance between those two things. The problem they've got to address is that the borrowing plans are too high. So if she doesn't want to cut spending, she could come back and raise taxes. The problem is she said she's not going to do that again, and that makes it more politically difficult. So
how do you think the
from a
markets
market's point of view, I don't think they would mind between tax rises and spending cuts. They want the borrowing to come down.
Yeah.
And the Chancellor needs to kind of seize that.
And neither of those is an easy option, right?
Well,
let's be honest.
I think the tax option is much more difficult politically because she's just done one of the biggest tax-raising budgets and said we'll never have to do it again. I think the spending changes will be embarrassing, but it's probably a little bit easier to come back and tweak your spending envelope. I think it is a bit less credible because it's, basically make me good, but not yet.
Rachel Reeves is also going to China in the coming days. It's obviously a key partner for us in the economy, but there are human rights issues. Some people have got a lot of concerns about the Chinese government. Do you think she's right to build these links with China?
Well, I imagine that she is cursing the timing, first of all, because it's very difficult for her to pull out of this trip, but actually it's not going to be a great look if the market volatility is still going on. Look, we do need to engage with China. I do think it's a slightly strange strategy that the government has when we have President Trump about to arrive in the White House, and he is going to be putting incredible pressure on allies in Europe to get much tougher on China, particularly when it comes to technology, export controls, and all the things that he's extremely concerned about. For the British government now to be trying to mend links with China in the middle of all that controversy, I think is going to put them at odds with that and is going to make their negotiations with the US over things like tariffs even more difficult.
That's interesting. So if it's a choice between the US and China, then the US is the one we
Well,
should be...
it's a more important economic and strategic partner for us. And indeed, we share many of the strategic concerns that the US has about China.
Just finally, Liz Truss, she's written a letter to Keir Starmer, effectively threatening legal action and asking him to stop saying she crashed the economy. Is that a sensible move? I mean, I can't really imagine how this would play out in the courts, you know, like a debate about whether the Conservatives crashed the economy.
I mean, look, it's clearly not good for the Conservative Party to have Liz Truss back in the news. From her point of view, surely this is a case of if you're in a hole, stop digging. She should just disappear for a few years and hope that it goes away. But it's clearly not a sensible strategy. I don't know who is advising her that it is.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Right, let's bring in our duo for the evening, shall we? The former Special Advisor for the Conservative Party, Shah, and Tom Baldwin, former Labour Advisor, author of biography of Keir Starmer. Great to have you both there. Sam, would you agree, then, with Liz Truss that she should just be quiet for a couple of years?
I mean, personally, I would like to see that. But I have to say, I do find this letter quite intriguing because if there is a case, if it does go to trial, I mean, first of all, what would that look like? What witnesses would be brought forward? But also, would it change the way that we do politics and the way that we kind of have our attack lines and the way that we run certain types of campaign? I mean, we saw this week, off the back of the Elon Musk comments around grooming, the posters that were used against Rishi Sunak that were then turned back. Does this mean that actually we have to think a little bit more credibly, a little bit more fact-focused about the way we run political attacks? I mean, to be honest with you, I don't think that this is necessarily an issue that's going to go away that easily because Liz Truss seems to have a bit between her teeth for it.
Would Labour not relish a court battle trying to prove the Conservatives crashed the economy?
I think Labour certainly are relishing Liz's timely return to the political scene, enter stage right, just as all difficult questions are being asked about the economy. Here comes Liz Truss to remind everybody about what she did to the economy. When you said, if there's a case, it's quite a lot. Hang on, that word.
If, yeah.
Right, I mean, I don't think the political attack that Liz Truss crashed the economy and caused market mayhem and pushed up interest rates for so many people in this country is the most controversial political attack of the last few years.
Careful, you might get a secret letter here.
I'll see you in court, Liz.
Let's talk about the economy, shall we? I think it was really interesting talking to both of those interviews. It's sometimes quite refreshing to have not the kind of political punch-ups of people who are trying to give more of a reasoned, nuanced take on it. Salma, how much of a problem do you think these economic news is?
It's a huge problem because the issue that has been so eloquently described by both Vince and Rupert in your interviews is that there is this difficulty and the choice that the Chancellor is going to have to make down the line about squeezing spending or raising taxes, neither of which are palatable. And if she does raise taxes, if that is the decision, then what does she go with without breaking a manifesto commitment? The other thing here that is sort of the shadow that's looming large over the Treasury is the lack of growth. And some people would say that her decision to put up national insurance and change the thresholds of personal taxation is one of the reasons why you're seeing such a slowdown. And if there is no dependence on growth for the next few years, then she's really going to struggle. So she's going to have to keep coming back to an increasingly depleting pot.
I mean, whatever the noise and whatever the kind of stories that we're covering, this really is what Labour will be judged on, isn't it? The management of the economy, public services, taxation. How difficult a road is it?
Look, it was always going to be a difficult road. I mean, last summer, Keir Starmer got some stick for saying, look, it's going to be really hard. It's going to get worse before it gets better. I mean, I think he was being honest there. I think he was trying to level with the British people, but, then usual political game is, you're talking down the economy. That's not why the economy is in trouble now. The economy is in trouble now because of these global headwinds coming from, Truss, from Trump. Sorry, Liz, I don't mean to blame you for this one. Donald Trump talking about tariffs, Donald Trump talking about tax cuts. We've got wars raging in the Middle East and Ukraine. We've got long-term effects of COVID. As you were saying earlier, we've got Brexit, which is a terrible decision, which is making this country poorer. Now, turning that round takes a long time.
But there are specific things particular to the UK, and I accept your point about the difficult situation, but there's specific things about the UK as well, aren't there? Whether it's Rachel Reeves not giving herself much headroom, whether it's the high levels of government borrowing.
Yeah, well, I mean, there was a survey of business recently about, what was the thing that holding them back from investing. To them, the biggest thing wasn't actually tax rates, it was stability. It was about certainty, about knowing what the government's direction was. So I think it's important that Labour does stick to those fiscal rules. I think it's important that, whatever potholes or storms they encounter on that road ahead, they show that stability that we didn't have under the Conservative government. We had 5 chancellors in 1 year, one point in the last Conservative government. That's what is causing part of this problem. We've got a long-term investment crisis in this country.
Yeah, it's not just a question, though, of political stability, which obviously everybody would prefer to have than not, but it is a question of fiscal stability. So I think that point is slightly undermined by the fact that we don't know whether Rachel Reeves is going to come back and where she may increase potential taxes. So say, for example, we have an increase in capital gains. That undermines the sort of positioning that she has right now in trying to attract inward investment. So I think there is also that question about providing that fiscal certainty where you take the direction and you're not setting yourself these really hard and fast rules if at some point you're not going to be able to stick to them.
Look, I mean, there's difficult choices everywhere. I mean, in the alternative universe where she hadn't raised tax, I think we'd be sitting in the studio now talking about a massive, massive crisis in the NHS, which is about to go over the cliff. We've already got a winter crisis because of flu and COVID, but I think we would have this would be the story now. So you're fixing one thing, then another thing's popping up. This is government in a very, very unstable world, and I mean one of the sort of silliest sort of Westminster sort of memes of the last few months has been, Keir Starmer's travelling too much, he's going abroad too much. I think it's absolutely essential that he's travelling. I think it's essential that Rachel Reeves is going to China because our problems as a country are about what's happening globally. I mean, we're a sort of island of political stability when quite a lot of other countries are looking unhinged. It's really important we have Keir Starmer going out and meeting people, and I'm really proud that the rest of the world wants to meet him.
OK, we'll have more from both of you as the programme goes on. You're watching the Politics Hub coming up. More pressure on the government after the Greater Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham said he supports a limited national inquiry into the grooming gangs scandal. Stay with us.
Paris reverberated to the sights, sounds and smells of conflict.
There's a focal point to all this anger, and that is Emmanuel Macron.
I'm Adam Parsons, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels.
There are dozens of people desperately clambering to get onto that boat. It is a chaotic scene, but it's being watched by dozens of French police officers on the beach.
I've reported on migration across Europe, close up on the ground, understanding that sense of desperation and meeting the criminal gangs behind it.
This old fishing boat set off from the Libyan port of Tobruk. There were 606 people who were on board.
So we've been distributing life jackets to all the people on board this boat, and now the first person is coming on board.
This is the ugly side of Italian football.
In Italy, everything is really organized.
Football's problems with hooliganism, racism were just dormant, and now they're back and they're getting worse.
We cover so many countries, languages and cultures and work hard to gain trust to bring you the full story first.
Help is slowly reaching these places.
It's not just homes, but whole streets like this one that have been reduced to rubble and dust.
This is a picture of destruction.
Everywhere you look in this mountaintop community, there is absolute devastation.
These are the settlers in waiting, keen to start a new life, to annex Gaza for Israel.
the least we can do is just kick them out of our land.
Gaza, which is just 2 miles in that direction, is under attack again.
Getting the chance to tell people's stories, it's a privilege.
I'm James Matthews, and I'm Sky's US correspondent, based here in Washington, D.C. Donald Trump, it would appear, is about to learn his fate. There's no doubting the strength of this hurricane as it roars through. Sky News, get the full story first. Do you fear a fourth indictment?
He's from Sky News. He's from Sky News. He's entitled to ask me questions.
Hello, welcome back. Well, yesterday, the government resisted calls from the Conservatives for a national inquiry into the grooming gangs scandal. But there is increased pressure on them tonight after an intervention from the Labour Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham. Well, our political correspondent Liz Bates joins me now. What's Andy Burnham been saying?
Well, first of all, you're right to say that this does increase pressure because Andy Burnham is in a slightly different category, I think, to a lot of the people that have been calling for this inquiry because he does have a good level of credibility when it comes to this issue. So let's see what he has said. He said, I do think there is a case for a limited national inquiry that draws on reviews like the one that I commissioned, the one I've seen in Rotherham and the one we saw in Telford. He gives quite an interesting reason, clearly quite well thought through for this. He says that a difference at a local level in a statutory public inquiry, there will always be limitations with what you can do with the local review. The review team could not compel someone to speak to them. The thing is, with a public inquiry, you can compel witnesses to be questioned. With a local inquiry, you can't do that. And so he felt that it was slightly limited and there is still more to be done. The reason I think that this is an interesting intervention, Sophie, is because we've seen this debate develop over the last few days. It has been very angry, very polarised. What the Labour Party have said is that those Conservative voices that have been calling for an inquiry, when you look at their parliamentary record, they've never really taken much of an interest in this over the past decade. And so they are accusing them of political opportunism. Of course, they refute that. Andy Burnham cannot be accused of political opportunism when it comes to this issue because he himself commissioned his own inquiry in Greater Manchester in 2017. It was a 3-part inquiry. It was broad. It did have its limitations. So the Labour Party cannot back this off as just another voice responding to Elon Musk. He does have credibility. And so in a week where they are trying to get ahead of this, they will not welcome this intervention from him.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because obviously Labour made a big thing about having these directly elected mayors who have independence. It's about devolution. But I guess the whole point of them being independent is they're not always going to completely agree with the government line, which is great in some ways, but not necessarily in all ways.
Absolutely, and Andy Burnham has spoken about this before. He says that he, when he was an MP, felt very constrained, and you are, because when you are directly under the power of the whips in a political party and a Prime Minister and you want to get on in politics, then you have to do what you're told. In the position that he's in, he has a voice, he uses it, and today he's using it to speak up for victims, and I think he really does make a good case for it, and as I say, the Labour Party are not going to welcome this.
OK, Liz, thank you very much indeed. Liz Bates there. Well, of course, the other big angle to this story was the impact from Elon Musk, who's made waves all week here in the UK. He's also been intervening tonight, this time in German politics. We're going to be crossing live to Frankfurt shortly. Let's actually, you know what, change plan. Let's do that now. We can go to Frankfurt straight away. We can talk to Adam Parsons, ever nimble on the Politics Hub. Adam, what's been happening?
Yeah, so tonight we've had a live X conversation between Elon Musk and Alice Weidel, who's the leader of the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland party, which is the far-right party, which has done really well over the past few years. It's up to early 20% in the opinion polls. Now, of course, there's a big election coming up next month. They're not going to win that election, but they may well come second, which will be a huge success story for the far right. Not that in this conversation they embrace that term far right. Neither of them. I should say this was effectively a love-in between Elon Musk and Alice Weidel. They talked, they chatted, they chuckled at each other's jokes. They varied with a rather unstructured position. I think we can give you a taste of just a couple of bits of that conversation from a little earlier between Elon Musk and Alice Weidel.
My recommendation for the people in Germany is to do the same. If you are unhappy with the situation, you must vote for change, and that is why I'm really strongly recommending that people vote for AfD. That's my strong recommendation, and I think this is simply the sensible move, and I think Alice Beadle's a very reasonable person, and hopefully people can tell just from this conversation, like nothing outrageous is being proposed, just common sense. In fact, as I've said publicly, I think only AfD can save Germany.
So clearly you can hear there, Sophie, this is yet again Elon Musk interfering in the politics of other countries, which has been inflammatory. He's been criticised by Emmanuel Macron, criticised very strongly by Pedro Sanchez, the Spanish Prime Minister, yesterday, but embraced by Alice Vidal, and I have to say by some people that we've spoken to who say that Elon Musk is a smart guy, is the richest guy in the world, and his opinions have to be listened to. A few bits to take from that, as well as endorsing the AfD. Well, what did they say? Alice Vidal saying that 7 million people have come into Germany since 2015, and that, of course, the crime rate to rocket here. Elon Musk echoing that, saying that crime rate was soaring in the United States because of migration. They agreed that the so-called, what Musk called the woke mind virus, had afflicted education in both countries. Alice Vidal said that the Nazis were in fact not a far-right group, but that Adolf Hitler was, quote, a socialist communist guy. I don't think many historians will back up that one too strongly. Elon Musk said that Donald Trump would solve the Ukraine conflict pretty quickly. Alice Vidal said that she would welcome that, and she also berated her predecessor as Chancellor, if she were to get that job, Angela Merkel, said that she brought in too many environmental policies and that she had brought in a flawed energy policy. And then it ended like two old friends leaving a bar after a very jolly catch-up.
Adam, thank you very much indeed. Adam Parsons there with that very vivid description from Frankfurt in Germany. Right, let's bring in Salma and Tom, shall we? Tom, fair to say you're not Elon Musk's biggest fan?
No, I mean, Elon Musk seems to think it's his role to go around commenting on other countries and doesn't talk about Russia very much. He talks about democratic countries like Britain and Germany, and he seems to want to interfere in their politics, use his right to free speech to do so. In the last few days, he's done something slightly different in that he's launched a series of really quite odd smears on Keir Starmer, relating to, saying that he's complicit in some sort of rape genocide, which seem to be referring to some trolls that he follows on his own platform and some fake, deep fake video. I mean, it's complete rubbish. And I think the media actually should have done a bit more just to call it out as a lie and a smear rather than do this sort of false equivalence between Elon Musk says this and Keir Starmer defends his role. And now this has been sort of elided into this question of about another public inquiry, because we've had one which took 7 years and £200 million before. And I think some of the reporting of it looks like kind of Keir Starmer's resisting a public inquiry into Elon Musk charges about what Keir Starmer did at the CPS, which are ludicrous when Keir Starmer did more probably to tackle rape gangs than anybody at CPS before or since.
I mean, your point about the media and calling out the smears, and it, I'm happy to do it today. Like,
you recognise these are falsehoods.
If you look at someone like Andrew Norfolk, who is a Times reporter who led reporting on this, he's come out to say that the only reason he did this was because of a spike in convictions that was caused partly by Keir Starmer as the DPP. So I think I completely accept that. The sort of, I guess, if you have the Elon Musk and the smears that we've discussed, but then there are also, I guess, some people who feel that the J report was not sufficient and they want to see a further inquiry because they feel that, I guess, the accountability isn't there, that they were failed. Andy Burnham is one of them. Salma, what's your view on this?
I think it's interesting because there is this conflation between the very extreme sort of language and the accusations and, smears and falsehoods that have been put around in relation to this versus the very real consequence for the... I don't want to use the term victim because they were a victim, but we're talking about women who have survived really terrible abuse. And I think the conflation of that is making this debate very difficult.
Yeah, it's true.
Because actually we need to separate those two things. There is an issue of misinformation in our politics that we need to address and has been an issue for a decade, I would say, increasingly so. And there is an issue with how we actually handle things that when they're not at the forefront of people's minds and at the forefront of the media. Now, whether that is a public inquiry or not is also an interesting question, because a public inquiry takes a long time, it costs a lot of money, and is there something else that's more suitable about the accountability, about bringing certain people to account, especially in local areas? But we are talking about particular issues that are still ongoing, as opposed to addressing this big problem of grooming, where fundamentally a lot of young girls, children, were ignored by people in authority. And that leaves a scar. And it is a stain on the establishment, and it's a stain on those authorities, and that stain has not yet been rubbed away.
Look, I mean, I agree with all of that. I think I listened very carefully to what Keir Starmer said in Parliament yesterday. And he said, look, he knows there are arguments to be made for another form of public inquiry. There are arguments to be made against that. I mean, Alexis Jay, who did the last inquiry, says, in fact, it's time to get on with implementing some of these recommendations, which the last government didn't do. I also read reports about Downing Street saying actually it wasn't completely closed to some other kind of inquiry, if that's what the victims and the survivors want. So, I mean, I slightly disagree with this idea that Andy Burnham's now split with Downing Street. I don't think it has. I think there is a reasonable case for some other public national discussion about what happened. But what there isn't is a case for aligning that with the smears that Elon Musk has been putting around, and which I think, frankly, Kemi Badenoch was playing games with a little bit over the weekend and at the beginning of this week. So if you can just take the politics out of this and talk about those young girls and women who suffered these horrible crimes and work out what the best thing to be done now, alongside implementing these recommendations which should have been implemented earlier, that seems to be a rational, calm place to be. But you don't get rational and calm in the social media sphere, and that's no way to start making good decisions for them.
OK, thanks both very much indeed. Now to America, because Donald Trump and the other surviving US presidents were among the attendees today at the state funeral service for Jimmy Carter, who died in December. A very sombre occasion, of course, but it did throw up a pretty interesting seating arrangement, shall we say. Donald Trump was sat next to Barack Obama, and the pair could be seen making small talk throughout. And of course, it left news organisations across the world busily contacting lip readers to try and find out exactly what they were saying. Salma and Tom are still here. Oh, to be a fly on that wall. Salma, what do you reckon?
Well, I can't wait for social media to come alive and sort of put voiceovers on them to imagine what they were saying. Look, there's this part of me that thinks that it's a very dignified scene. It's the funeral of a former president, and of course that they should be having chit-chat. But it is very contrary to the kind of Trump image, isn't it, about this sort of forceful guy who, really stands up to his opponents. It's a very strange image to see him just chit-chatting there with his, I would say, pretty long-time rival. He doesn't like Barack Obama. He sort of started all that stuff about his birth certificate and where he was born. So it is odd, isn't it? But it's actually nice to see.
They were so chatty as well. It's like, on the school bus, they would be the two at the back of the bus, who wouldn't stop yabbering away, right?
Yeah, and the obvious contrast is when Trump lost, he wasn't, reaching out. He wasn't, showing that grace, I think, that Barack Obama's showing. Look, maybe some of this will help normalise Trump. We don't know what Trump 2.0 is. I sort of slightly fear the worst. But, it's also about Jimmy Carter, who, that was a loser who really showed how to lose. In that his reputation soared every year, really, after he left the White House, after just a one-term president. And, we've had prime ministers in this country, I think, who look better since they left. I think Gordon Brown, Theresa May, actually, both look better since they left office. And we've had prime ministers, we talked about one of them earlier, who I think looks progressively worse.
Careful.
Sorry,
Get
the
careful
lawyers
here.
are
I'm
watching.
protecting you from yourself.
Yeah.
Melania wasn't really getting involved in the conversation, I have to say, when you look at the image. She wasn't really getting in on the small talk.
Not at all.
Not so much. Thanks both very much indeed. Still to come on the Politics Hub. RMT leader Mick Lynch announces he's stepping down. We'll look back at what made him one of the country's most recognisable public figures.
Coming up at 8 o'clock, as 200,000 residents in LA are told to leave their burning neighbourhoods. We'll speak to one of the Brits caught up in the chaos. Also, pressure ramping up on the NHS, with hospital bosses saying it's as bad as at the height of the pandemic. And the Gavin and Stacey finale that just keeps on giving. We're joined by one of the stars whose signed script has raised thousands for charity. All that and much more on the UK Tonight at 8.
Two clubs separated by a 3.5-mile stretch of urban North London. The North London derby occupies centre stage. And that's a beautiful finish. The circle, that's just stunning.
The North London derby, only on Peacock.
We've come to one of Moscow's Cold War bunkers. It was built as a top-secret command centre.
Being here really feels like you're stepping back in time. I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
A show of military might and menace.
Courage, bravery and sacrifice will win the day.
It's a new subject. They'll learn about combat drones and some how to handle a Kalashnikov.
The Kremlin continues to put forward its own version of events, both present and past.
There's no mention of the fact that Russia invaded its neighbour. That's rewriting history, isn't it?
Now we have to read it carefully.
Vladimir Putin put forward his plan for a ceasefire in Ukraine, telling Kiev, pull out of your eastern territories and the war will end. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Vladimir Putin is already the Kremlin's longest-serving leader since Stalin. The question is, what will a fifth Putin term mean for Russia and the world?
Why do you support Vladimir Putin, Mr. Segal?
I can't answer questions that stupid.
I've watched Vladimir Putin attempt to create a new world order.
The St. Petersburg Economic Forum was the backdrop to Vladimir Putin's latest verbal volley that Russia could send missiles to other nations to target the West.
Ambassador, I wonder, shall we have a quick word for Sky News?
Is the West right? Are you fueling Russia's war machine?
Swedish media, oh my God, you're not afraid of being here.
American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, who was first on display.
Russia says Evan Gershkovich was caught red-handed, but has never produced any evidence to back that up. Sky News, get the full story first.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now, it's not that common in the modern age for a trade union leader to really register with the general public, but Mick Lynch, leader of the RMT union, achieved that with his combative stance towards the Conservative government and rail companies on pay. Now, that won him some fans, but also villain status for some politicians, and today he announced his retirement.
I'm always positive. I've had my muesli, I'm ready to go.
We have to make a stand in defence of safety, in defence of jobs, conditions and pay. If there's not a settlement, we will continue our campaign. The fingerprints of Grant Shapps and the DNA of Rishi Sunak are all over the problems on the railway.
This is how the unions are thanking the public, by going on strike at the first opportunity they get.
And I always get my way if I strike for higher pay.
Congratulations for coming to the conference in spite of the best efforts of Mr. Mick Lynch.
We feel that we've been compelled to take this action because of the intransigence of the government.
And let's win for our class and for our people. Thank you very much and good night.
Great music, I love it. Let's chat to Salma and Tom again, shall we? I remember once talking to Mick Lynch after an interview, and I asked him if he get recognised a lot. He was like, all the time. He's constantly getting recognised. And he did have that kind of fame, didn't he? Like, what do you think it was that... I mean, he still does, obviously. I'm talking to... He's only retired. But what do you think it is that made him such a public figure?
I think he had this... The combative style was always a little bit mischievous and a little bit cheeky as well. And he sort of did the take... I think he played his role incredibly well. And it's always quite easy when you have a single issue that you're driving towards and you don't have the complexity and you're not trying to manage lots of different groups and stakeholders, you're only serving one cohort, that you can be sort of forthright. You don't sound mealy-mouthed. You're not trying to balance or equivocate. You can just be really forthright. And I think that makes for, you know, good television. It's almost entertainment. It's almost Trumpian in the way that you can kind of pursue that. And it does make a character.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, like, I think he sort of deconstructed, almost short-circuited some sort of the media approach to him. You know, like he was meant to play this role of the militant trade union leader, but he's quite smart, he's quite fast on his feet, and he's actually rather cleverer than some of the people interviewing him, not the present company accepted.
You are right, I agree with you on that.
So that makes him stand out. That makes him, you know, people sort of notice that, they kind of, something clicks. I do think sort of towards the end, the thing that happens to so many people in politics, they become a kind of caricature of themselves. They sort of read their own publicity, and you had to have a sort of funny line every time. He had, you know, and I think probably it's a good time for him to go. I think it's becoming less effective as an act.
I think you're actually right, if I may say so, on people underestimating him, because I remember I was on the Sunday show at the time, when he kind of first broke through and people were interviewing him for the first time, and I think that people perhaps did underestimate him at that early stage. And it's partly, you know, maybe a class thing or whatever it is. And then you come in, you're like, no, this guy, OK. And then I remember the first time I interviewed, I said, right, I'm going to do so much homework for Mick Lynch, you know. I've seen what happens. I'm going to write my notes down. I remember this. I remember it. I'm sure he'll be back on, though. He might be in this chair as a panellist, so he does a bit of a... Fan of Mick Lynch thing, quickly?
Fan?
Yeah.
I respect and admire anybody who can use their tactics to succeed.
Love her. Thanks both very much indeed. Great to have you on the Politics Hub this evening. I will see you on Monday at 7. That is all from us tonight. Up next, though, it is the UK Tonight with Sarah J. Mee. And then, of course, at 9 p.m, you have The World with Yada Hakeem. But I'll see you on Monday. In the meantime, have a great weekend.